She stood before him with trembling hands pressed against her ribs, feeling the thunder of her own heartbeat as if it might shatter bone. His eyes, dark as winter water, held her captive without a single word, and the air between them thickened with all the things she could never say. The candlelight carved shadows across his face, and she wondered if this was how drowning felt. Slow, inevitable, beautiful. Everything she had buried was rising to the surface. And she could not breathe. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell me which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The morning arrived without ceremony, pale and hesitant through the narrow window of the servants' quarters. Elara woke to the sound of bells, not the joyful kind that celebrated weddings or harvests, but the low, mournful toll that marked the changing of the guard at Thornwell Manor. She lay still for a moment, listening to the rhythm of her own breathing, feeling the thin wool blanket scratch against her skin like penance. The cold had settled into the stone walls overnight, and she could see her breath hanging in the air like small ghosts that vanished before they could be named. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the other housemaids who shared the cramped attic room. Her feet touched the floor, and the chill shot through her bones immediately, sharp as accusation. There were no rugs here, no comfort, only the bare essentials granted to those who existed at the edges of the household, invisible until needed, forgotten the moment they left a room. Elara had learned long ago not to expect warmth, neither from the stones beneath her feet nor from the people who inhabited the grand rooms below. Dressing quickly in the gray uniform that marked her station, she twisted her dark hair into a tight braid, securing it with a length of frayed ribbon. The mirror above the wash basin was cracked down the middle, splitting her reflection into two halves that didn't quite align. She studied her face for a moment, the pale skin that betrayed her mother's foreign blood, the eyes too large and too dark for conventional beauty, the mouth that rarely smiled because smiles were not expected from girls like her. The corridors of Thornwell Manor stretched like arteries through a sleeping giant, cold stone and darker shadows converging in angles that seemed designed to disorient. Elara moved through them with practiced silence, her footsteps barely whispering against the floor. Dawn light filtered through tall windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the polished floors. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Thornwell lords and ladies frozen in oil and canvas, their eyes following her progress with what seemed like judgment. The great hall awaited her with its vaulted ceiling and massive fireplace, cold now, filled with yesterday's ashes. Elara knelt before it, beginning the morning ritual of clearing away the dead coals. Her hands grew black with soot, and the fine dust settled into the creases of her palms like dark prophecy. She worked methodically, her mind elsewhere, remembering fragments of dreams she couldn't quite hold. She had been brought to Thornwell Manor 7 years ago, at 13, after her mother's death from a fever that had taken her quickly. There had been no father to claim her, only whispers and sidelong glances from the village women who had known her mother. Orphan, they called her. Bastard, some said more quietly. The housekeeper, Mrs. Grimsby, had taken her in with thin-lipped disapproval, making it clear that Elara's place was heavy boots against stone, a man's stride purposeful and unhurried. Elara kept her head down, focusing on the ashes, hoping to remain unnoticed. The footsteps stopped, She could feel the weight of observation pressing against her shoulders like a physical hand. "You're the new girl." The voice was low, textured like gravel and honey mixed together. "Not so new anymore, my lord." Her own voice came out smaller than she intended. She didn't look up. "Stand." It wasn't a request. Elara rose slowly, brushing her sooty hands against her apron, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. She could see his boots, fine leather, polished to a mirror shine. "Look at me." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Slowly, she raised her eyes. Lord Gideon Thornwell stood before her, the master's eldest son, returned after 3 years abroad. He was taller than seemed natural, with shoulders that filled the space around him. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile, and eyes the color of storm clouds over dark water. "What's your name?" "Elara, my lord." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze traveling over her face with a thoroughness that felt almost physical. She felt exposed, as if he could see through the careful blankness she had learned to wear like armor. Heat crept up her neck despite the cold morning air. "Elara," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the empty hall until they faded into silence. She stood there long after he was gone, her heart still racing, her hands trembling slightly. The ashes at her feet seemed suddenly darker, the morning light sharper. Something had shifted in the air of Thornwell Manor, subtle as a change in pressure before a storm. Evening descended over Thornwell Manor like a velvet curtain, thick and heavy with promise. Mrs. Grimsby found Elara in the library that afternoon, polishing the mahogany tables until they gleamed like dark water. The housekeeper's face was pinched with disapproval. "His lordship has requested you serve at dinner tonight." Elara's cloth paused mid-stroke. "Me, ma'am?" "Don't look so shocked, girl, and don't get ideas above your station. You'll serve and keep your mouth shut and your eyes down. Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am." But Elara's mind was already racing. Dinner at Thornwell Manor was a formal affair, reserved for the family and their distinguished guests. Servants were meant to be invisible, mere shadows that filled glasses and cleared plates without drawing attention. Why would Lord Gideon specifically request her presence? The dining hall blazed with candlelight when evening came, dozens of flames dancing in crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling like frozen tears. The long table had been set with silver and china, each piece precisely placed. The air smelled of roasted meat and wine and beeswax, rich scents that made Elara's empty stomach clench. The family arrived in a rustle of silk and the low murmur of conversation. Lady Thornwell entered first, the master's wife, a woman whose beauty had been preserved like something pickled in vinegar, sharp and acidic. Her daughter Rosalind followed, blonde and delicate as porcelain, her laugh tinkling like breaking glass. Then Lord Thornwell himself, gray-haired and stern, his face carved from the same unforgiving stone as the manor walls. And finally, Gideon. He wore black, almost entirely, save for the white of his shirt beneath his jacket. The candlelight caught in his dark hair, making it gleam like a raven's wing. He moved with a predator's grace, unhurried and absolutely certain. When he took his seat at the table, his eyes swept the room and found her immediately, standing against the wall with the other servants. The contact lasted only a second, but Elara felt it like a touch, something warm and dangerous sliding down her spine. Dinner began. Alara moved through her duties with mechanical precision, pouring wine, removing plates, keeping her presence as unobtrusive as possible. But she was acutely aware of every moment, every sound. Lady Thornwell's voice was a constant stream of gossip and complaint. Rosalind simpered and preened, directing her conversation almost exclusively toward her brother, touching his arm with proprietary familiarity that made Alara's skin crawl for reasons she couldn't name. "You've been back 3 days, Gideon, and you've barely told us anything about your travels," Rosalind pouted. "Surely you encountered something interesting in those barbarous eastern kingdoms." Gideon's expression remained neutral as he lifted his wineglass. "The East is not as barbarous as we've been taught to believe. Their libraries rival our own. Their understanding of the stars surpasses anything I've seen in our universities." Lord Thornwell frowned. "Careful, son. That sounds dangerously close to admiration for heathens." "Knowledge has no religion, father." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Lady Thornwell laughed, a brittle, nervous sound, and changed the subject quickly. Alara was refilling Gideon's glass when Rosalind's voice cut through the air like a blade. "This wine is absolutely bitter. What incompetent fool selected it?" Alara's hand faltered, and a single drop of red wine splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. The silence that followed was deafening. "Clumsy little wretch." Rosalind's eyes were bright with malice. "Look what you've done." "I apologize, Miss Rosalind." Alara kept her voice steady despite the heat flooding her cheeks. "I'll fetch a cloth immediately." "You'll do no such thing." Lady Thornwell's voice was ice. "You'll stand there and explain how someone so utterly without grace came to be serving in this household." Alara's throat tightened. She could feel every eye in the room on her, could sense the other servants shrinking back against the walls. Her hands clenched at her sides, nails biting into her palms. "The stain is barely visible." Gideon's voice cut through the tension with the finality of a door closing. "And the wine is excellent. Perhaps your palate has been dulled by too much sugar, sister." Rosalind's face flushed an ugly red. "How dare you?" "I dare because it's the truth." He didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone made even Lord Thornwell pause. "The girl has done nothing to warrant your cruelty." The room held its breath. Lady Thornwell's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Rosalind looked as if she might cry or scream, or both. But no one dared contradict Lord Gideon when he spoke in that particular tone, the one that carried centuries of authority in every syllable. Dinner continued in strained silence. Alara finished her duties with shaking hands, hyper-aware of Gideon's presence at the table, of the way he hadn't looked at her again after his defense. When the meal finally ended and the family retired to the drawing room, she fled to the kitchen with relief flooding her veins. But the respite was brief. Mrs. Grimsby found her washing dishes, her hands red in the scalding water. "His lordship wants to see you in the library." Alara's heart stopped. "When?" "Now, girl. Don't keep him waiting." The walk to the library felt like a march to an execution. Alara's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Perhaps he regretted defending her. Perhaps this was where he would deliver some private reprimand, away from his family's eyes. Perhaps. She knocked on the library door. 3 soft raps. "Enter." The library was dimmer than the dining hall, lit only by the fire in the hearth and a single lamp on the desk. Gideon stood by the window, his back to her, looking out at the dark grounds. The moonlight painted his profile in silver. "Close the door." She did, her heart hammering so loud she was certain. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the tick of the clock on the mantel. "Do you know why I asked for you at dinner?" "No, my lord." He turned to face her then, and the firelight caught in his eyes, making them gleam like polished stone. "Because I wanted to see if I was imagining it." "Imagining what, my lord?" "The way everyone in this house looks right through you, as if you're not quite real, as if you're already a ghost." He took a step closer, and Alara had to fight the urge to retreat. "But you're very real, aren't you, Alara?" She didn't know how to answer that, didn't know what game he was playing or what he wanted from her. Her silence seemed to amuse him. "My sister is cruel because she's bored and powerless. My mother is cruel because she's afraid of being forgotten. They take it out on you because you can't fight back." Another step closer. "Does it make you angry?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. "It doesn't matter if it does, my lord." That's not an answer. She met his eyes then, really met them, and something reckless stirred in her chest. "Yes, it makes me angry." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not a kind smile, but one of recognition. "Good. Anger is honest. Anger keeps you alive." He moved past her to the desk, picking up a leather-bound book. "Can you read?" "Yes, my lord." "My mother taught me." "Your mother?" He turned the book over in his hands thoughtfully. "The woman from Kesh who died 7 years ago. The woman no one speaks of." Ilara's breath caught. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know things." He held out the book to her. "Take it, read it, return it when you're finished, and we'll discuss it." She stared at the offered book, afraid to reach for it. "My lord, I don't understand." "You don't have to understand. You just have to read." When she still hesitated, his voice softened slightly. "It won't bite, Ilara, and neither will I. Take it." Her fingers closed around the leather binding. It was warm from his touch, and heavier than she expected. The title was embossed in gold, "Philosophies of the Ancient East." Why? The word escaped before she could stop it. Gideon looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the shifting firelight. "Because I suspect you're capable of more than scrubbing ashes from hearths, and because no one else in this God-forsaken house is capable of an interesting conversation." He gestured toward the door. "You're dismissed." "And Alara?" He waited until she turned back to face him. "Don't let my sister's venom poison you. She's not worth the space she takes up in your thoughts." Alara walked back through the dark corridors in a daze, the book heavy in her arms. She hid it beneath her mattress that night, but she couldn't sleep. Finally, when the other maids had fallen asleep, she carefully extracted the book. By the light of a single candle stub, she opened it and began to read. The words inside were revelatory, philosophies about the nature of consciousness, about the illusion of separation between self and world, about the way power structures relied on convincing the powerless of their own worthlessness. She read hungrily, her mind expanding with each page. 3 nights later, she returned to the library as instructed. Gideon was waiting, seated in one of the leather chairs by the fire, a glass of dark amber liquid in his hand. He gestured to the chair opposite without standing. "Did you finish it?" "Yes, my lord." "And what did you think?" Alara hesitated, clutching the book to her chest like a shield. This felt like a test, but she couldn't discern the correct answer. "I think," she said slowly, "that the author makes a compelling argument about how we're taught to see the world, how the stories we're told from childhood shape what we believe is possible." "Go on." "He suggests that most suffering is unnecessary, that it exists because we accept it as inevitable rather than questioning the systems that create it." She paused, then added more quietly, I think he's right. Gideon's eyes gleamed in the firelight. Dangerous thoughts for a housemaid. You gave me the book, my lord. So I did. He took a sip of his drink, studying her over the rim of the glass. Do you know what I learned in the East, Alara? I learned that everything we're taught about the natural order is a lie. There are places where women rule kingdoms. Places where the color of your skin or the circumstances of your birth matter less than the quality of your mind. Places where a bastard orphan could become something more than a servant. The word bastard fell between them like a stone into still water. Ilara felt her face flush hot. My lord, don't. He set down his glass and leaned forward. Don't pretend to misunderstand me. I know exactly what you are, and I'm telling you it doesn't matter. Not to me. She didn't know what to do with that information. It felt too big, too dangerous. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of being surrounded by people who think exactly what they're told to think. Because I see something in you, a spark that shouldn't exist, according to everything this society believes. I want to know if that spark is real or if I'm imagining it. The confession hung in the air between them. Alara's heart raced, her mind spinning with the implications. This was insane. He was the heir to Thornwell Manor. She was nothing, nobody, and yet, it's real, she whispered. Something shifted in Gideon's expression, like clouds parting to reveal sun. Then let's see what happens when we feed it. He stood, crossing to one of the library shelves and selecting another volume. Read this next. Come back in 3 days. We'll talk. The pattern established itself. Every 3 days, Alara would return to the library after the household had retired. They would talk about the books at first, but gradually about other things. He told her about his travels, about the universities he'd visited, the scholars he'd met. She told him about her mother, about the fragments of memory she had from before Thornwell Manor. The conversations felt dangerous, like standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down. There was an intimacy to them that had nothing to do with physical proximity and everything to do with the sharing of hidden selves. Gideon spoke to her as an equal, challenged her thoughts, respected her opinions. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. But the manor noticed. Rosalind's eyes tracked Alara through the halls with renewed malice. Lady Thornwell's commands became sharper, the punishments for minor infractions more severe. The other servants began to distance themselves, sensing danger but not understanding its source. One afternoon, Alara was polishing silver in the pantry when 2 of the older maids cornered her. "Think you're special, don't you?" Martha, the cook's assistant, sneered. "Being called to the library like a lady." "I don't think anything," Alara said evenly, not looking up from her work. "I do as I'm told." "We've all seen how he looks at you." This from Sarah, whose face was pinched with, "That's all. Talk." Martha laughed bitterly. "Mark my words, this won't end well. For any of us." They left her alone then, but their words echoed in Alara's mind long after they were gone. Because they were right, weren't they? Whatever was happening between her and Gideon couldn't last. Eventually, reality would reassert itself. It happened sooner than she expected. Lord Thornwell called a family meeting one evening, and the entire household buzzed with speculation. Ilara served tea in the drawing room, trying to be invisible as the family gathered. Gideon arrived last, his expression carefully neutral. "I've received a letter from Lord Ashworth," the elder Thornwell announced without preamble. "He's accepted our proposal. The marriage contracts will be drawn up within the month." Rosalind clapped her hands together with delight. "Oh, Gideon, how wonderful!" Lady Eleanor Ashworth is such a beauty, and the alliance will be no. The single word fell into the room like a thunderclap. Everyone froze. Lord Thornwell's face darkened to an alarming shade of red. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no." Gideon's voice was calm, almost conversational. "I won't marry Eleanor Ashworth or anyone else you've selected for me." "You ungrateful!" Lord Thornwell sputtered, his composure cracking. "Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed to arrange this match? The Ashworth fortune alone would secure our family's position for generations." "Then let Rosalind marry into the Ashworth family. I'm sure they'd be willing to negotiate." Rosalind gasped as if she'd been slapped. Lady Thornwell rose to her feet, her face pale with fury. "How dare you speak to your father this way? After everything he's done for you, opportunities to become a replica of him? To sacrifice any genuine feeling for the sake of maintaining a bloodline?" Gideon stood as well, and suddenly the room felt too small to contain the force of his presence. "I've seen the world, Mother. I've seen how other people live. I won't imprison myself in a loveless marriage for the sake of your social ambitions." Ilara stood frozen against the wall, the tea tray forgotten in her hands. She shouldn't be witnessing this, shouldn't be hearing these private family matters. But she couldn't move, couldn't look away from Gideon's face, from the absolute certainty written there. Lord Thornwell stood slowly, his hands clenched into fists. "If you refuse this match, you'll leave me no choice. I'll disinherit you. You'll have nothing, no title, no fortune, no future." "Then I'll have nothing." Gideon's voice didn't waver. "But at least I'll have myself." He turned and walked out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Ilara finally remembered to breathe, but her hands were shaking so badly the teacups rattled on their saucers. Lady Thornwell's eyes snapped to her. "Get out, all of you, get out." The servants fled. Ilara made it to the kitchen before her legs gave out. She collapsed onto a stool, her mind reeling. What had just happened? Had Gideon really just thrown away his entire inheritance? And why? For what? A terrible, impossible hope began to bloom in her chest, even as her rational mind tried to crush it. No, it couldn't be. He wasn't refusing marriage for her. That would be madness, wouldn't it? The manor transformed into a battlefield overnight. Lord Thornwell locked himself in his study, refusing meals. Lady Thornwell took to her bed with a mysterious illness. Rosalind wept dramatically in various rooms, and Gideon disappeared. For 3 days, Ilara didn't see him. His chambers remained dark. His meals returned untouched. The library stood empty, the fire unlit, waiting. On the 4th night, she couldn't bear it anymore. After the household settled into sleep, Ilara slipped through the dark halls to Gideon's wing. She shouldn't be here. If anyone caught her, she'd be dismissed immediately. But her feet carried her forward anyway. She knocked so softly she wasn't sure he'd hear. Silence answered. She was about to turn away when the door opened. Gideon stood in the doorway, disheveled in a way she'd never seen him. His shirt was open at the collar, his hair uncombed, shadows carved deep beneath his eyes. But those eyes, they focused on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Ilara. Her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer or a curse. "You shouldn't be here." "I know, I'm sorry, She didn't know how to finish that sentence. "I brought your book back." He stared at it for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, but Ilara stepped inside anyway. The room was spare, almost monastic. A large bed with dark coverings, a desk covered in papers and books, a single window overlooking the grounds. A fire burned low in the grate, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He closed the door behind her. The click of the latch seemed impossibly loud. "They're saying you've gone mad." Alara's voice came out barely above a whisper. "That the Eastern philosophies corrupted your mind." Perhaps they did. Gideon moved to the window, putting distance between them. Or perhaps they simply woke me up from a dream I'd been having my entire life. The dream that any of this matters, the title, the wealth, the carefully arranged marriages. He turned to face her. "Do you know what I realized while I was away?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I realized that I'd never felt anything real. Everything was performance, duty, expectation. I moved through my life like an actor playing a role someone else had written for me." His gaze locked onto hers, "Until I came back. Until I saw you kneeling by that fireplace, covered in ashes. And something in your eyes made me feel like I'd been struck by lightning." The air in the room changed, growing thick and charged. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. "My lord." "Don't call me that. Not here, not now." He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. "That I think about the way you furrow your brow when you're reading, and it makes me want to burn this entire manor down just to see you smile." She couldn't move, couldn't think. His words washed over her like a wave. "This is impossible. I know. You're the heir to Thornwell. I'm nothing, less than nothing. You're everything." He raised his hand as if to touch her face, then stopped himself, his fingers hovering inches from her skin. "Tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me I'm imagining this connection between us, and I'll let you go. I'll stop summoning you to the library. I'll pretend this never happened. Just tell me I'm alone in this madness." Alara looked up at him, at the raw vulnerability in his expression, and knew she couldn't lie. "You're not alone." The admission hung between them like a confession. Gideon's hand completed its journey, his fingers brushing against her cheek with a gentleness that made her eyes sting with sudden tears. His touch was warm, real, everything she'd never allowed herself to want. "Then what do we do?" His voice was rough, uncertain in a way she'd never heard from him before. "I don't know." Tears spilled over, tracking hot down her cheeks. "There's no world where this ends well. You know that." "Then we make a new world." He wiped away her tears with his thumb, the gesture achingly tender. "I've seen enough of this one to know it's broken anyway. Deeply, fundamentally broken. So we make a new one, where a lord can love a housemaid without the sky falling down." Love. He'd said it so easily, as if the word didn't carry the weight of 1,000 impossibilities. Alara's breath hitched. "Gideon, I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other outside of books and philosophy. But I also know I've never felt more awake than when I'm talking to you. Never felt more myself than when you're challenging my ideas and making me think differently." His other hand came up to frame her face, holding her like something precious and fragile. "I can't offer you what I was born into. My father will make good on his threat. But I can offer you everything I am without the title. A life we build together on our own terms. Would that be enough?" The question broke something open inside her, all the carefully constructed walls she built to survive. She thought about her mother, who had loved unwisely and paid for it. She thought about the 7 years she'd spent making herself small and invisible. She thought about the books in the library, about all those philosophies of possibility and transformation. And she thought about Gideon's eyes in the firelight, the way he looked at her like she was worth everything he was about to lose. "Yes," she whispered, "it would be enough." He kissed her then, softly, reverently, like a vow being sealed. His lips were warm against hers, and she could taste salt. Her tears or his, she couldn't tell. The kiss was brief, chaste even, but it felt like the world tilting on its axis. When they parted, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "We'll have to leave. Soon, before my father acts. I have some money put aside. It won't be the life you'd have if I'd kept my inheritance, but I don't want that life." Ilara's voice was steady now, certain. "I just wanted to exist, without feeling like I was apologizing for it every moment. Then we'll find a place where we can both exist freely." "Sorry." They planned in whispers and stolen moments, cobbling together an escape that felt both inevitable and insane. Gideon would withdraw what funds he could access. Ilara would gather her few possessions. They would leave before dawn, while the manor slept, and make for the port city of Harwich. But secrets in old houses have a way of escaping through the cracks. It was Rosalind who discovered them, of course. She'd made a habit of tracking her brother's movements since the confrontation, fueled by spite and something darker, a possessive jealousy that curdled everything it touched. She'd noticed the pattern of Ilara's nighttime absences, had heard the whispers among the servants. On the night before their planned departure, Rosalind followed Ilara through the dark corridors. She watched as Ilara slipped into Gideon's wing, saw the door open and close. And then she ran, quick as poison through veins, to wake her parents. Ilara was helping Gideon sort through documents when the pounding started, fists against wood, violent and urgent. They froze, their eyes meeting in mutual understanding and dread. "Gideon!" Lord Thornwell's voice boomed through the door. "Open this immediately!" There was no time to hide, no time to pretend. Gideon moved to stand between Ilara and the door. "Don't," he said quietly to her. "Don't apologize. Don't cower. Whatever happens now, stand tall." The door burst open. Lord Thornwell filled the doorway, his face purple with rage, Lady Thornwell and Rosalind crowding behind him. Their eyes went immediately to Ilara, and a hatred in those gazes was a physical force. "You dare!" Lord Thornwell's voice shook with fury. "Under my own roof, with this creature?" "Careful, father." Gideon's voice was cold as winter stone. "Choose your next words very carefully." "I'll choose whatever words I damn well please." "You've dragged our family name through the mud, refused an advantageous marriage, and now I find you've been carrying on with a servant? A bastard whose mother—" "Finish that sentence and you'll regret it." Something dangerous flickered in Gideon's eyes. "Ilara is worth 10 of anyone in this family, including me. If you can't speak of her with respect, you won't speak of her at all." Lady Thornwell let out a theatrical sob. "How could you do this to us? After everything we've given you?" "You've given me nothing but expectations and chains." Gideon's voice didn't rise. "And I'm done wearing them." Rosalind pushed forward, her face twisted with malice. "She's bewitched you. That's what these foreign wenches do. They use dark arts to ensnare good Christian men." "My mother was a scholar." Ilara's voice surprised everyone, including herself. She stepped out from behind Gideon, her hands clenched at her sides, her head held high despite the trembling in her limbs. She was educated, intelligent, and she had the misfortune of loving a man who promised her everything and gave her nothing but me. If that makes her a witch, then your entire society is built on witchcraft. The silence that followed was absolute. No servant had ever spoken to the Thornwell family that way. The rules that governed the household demanded silence and submission. Speaking out was unthinkable. which made it all the more powerful. Lady Thornwell's face went white, then red. "How dare you address your betters with such insolence? Edward, have her whipped. You'll do no such thing." Gideon moved to stand beside Alara, not in front of her, but with her. "Touch her and I'll burn this manor to the ground." "You're not capable of such violence," Lord Thornwell scoffed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. You never bothered to know me at all." Gideon reached out and took Ilara's hand in his, the gesture deliberate and public. "We're leaving. Tonight. And you can't stop us. I can disinherit you. I can make sure no respectable family in the kingdom will associate with you. I can destroy any chance you have of making a life for yourself." "Do it then." Gideon squeezed Alara's hand. "Take the title, the money, all of it. I don't need your approval or your fortune." "I only need her!" Rosalind let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scream. "You'll regret this. When the money runs out and reality sets in, this isn't infatuation." Gideon's voice was quiet but absolute. "This is the first real choice I've ever made. The first true thing I've ever felt, and I'd make it 1,000 times over." Lord Thornwell stared at his son as if seeing a stranger. "Then you're no son of mine. Gather your things and be gone by morning. As of this moment, you have no claim to Thornwell. You're nothing." "I'm free," Gideon corrected. "Finally, completely free." They left Lord Thornwell standing in the doorway, his face carved from stone. Lady Thornwell's sobs echoed down the corridor. Rosalind's curses followed them like birds of ill omen. But Alara and Gideon walked through the manor hand in hand, past the portraits of dead Thornwells, whose painted eyes could no longer judge them, past the servants who pressed themselves against walls and stared, past everything that had once seemed permanent and immutable. They gathered their few possessions as dawn began to paint the sky gray and pink. Alara had nothing but the clothes she wore and the books Gideon had given her. Gideon took only what he could carry: documents, money, a few volumes that meant something to him. At the door, they paused one final time. The manor loomed behind them, dark and brooding, a monument to tradition and hierarchy. Ahead lay the unknown, a future unwritten, uncertain, terrifying in its openness. "Are you afraid?" Alara asked quietly. "Terrified," Gideon admitted, "and more alive than I've ever been." They stepped out into the dawn together, leaving Thornwell Manor behind. The gates closed with a finality that sounded like freedom. The road stretched ahead, muddy and uncertain, leading toward a port city and a ship and a life they would have to build from nothing. But they were together. And for now, in this moment of transformation and terrible hope, that was enough. The journey to Harwich took 3 days by coach, each mile putting distance between them and the life they'd left behind. Ilara watched the landscape change through the window, the manicured estates giving way to wild forests, then rolling farmland, and finally the flat marshes that signaled their approach to the coast. Gideon had rented them separate rooms at each inn, mindful of propriety even in their flight. But they spent the evenings talking in the common rooms, making plans, imagining futures. He spoke of his contacts in the merchant guilds, of opportunities in trade and shipping. She listened and added her own thoughts, surprised to find he valued her opinion. "You're going to be my partner in this," he said one evening, over a simple meal of bread and cheese. "Not my dependent. We're building something together." The word partner resonated in Alara's chest like a bell. She'd never imagined herself as anyone's partner, only ever as someone's burden or servant or shame. but Gideon looked at her like she was essential. Harwich greeted them with salt air and the cry of gulls. The port city was alive with motion. Ships loading and unloading cargo, merchants haggling in a dozen languages, sailors with sun-darkened skin and stories from far-off lands. It smelled of fish and tar and possibility. Gideon led her through the crowded streets to a modest building near the docks. A wooden sign hung above the door, Bennett and Sons, shipping agents. Inside, a middle-aged man with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers looked up from his ledgers. "Lord Thornwell?" He rose, confused. "Just Gideon now," Gideon interrupted gently. "No title. I've left all that behind." He drew Ilara forward. "This is Ilara, my partner. I've come to take you up on that offer you made, if it still stands." The man, Bennett, looked between them, clearly piecing together a story from incomplete information. But he was clever enough not to ask unnecessary questions. "The position is still available, though I should warn you it's hard work. Long hours, difficult negotiations, unpredictable profits." "Perfect," Gideon said with a slight smile. "We're looking for something real." They spent the next week settling into their new life. Gideon worked alongside Bennett, learning the shipping trade from the ground up. Ilara found work as well, using her literacy to help manage the accounting books, her quick mind proving valuable in tracking complex transactions. It was strange at first, being called Miss Ilara instead of just girl, being thanked for her work instead of scolded, being asked her opinion instead of told to be silent. She kept expecting the dream to shatter, but Gideon was always there, steady as a heartbeat. In the evenings, they'd walk along the harbor, watching the ships come and go, talking about their day. Slowly, cautiously, they were building something, not just a life, but a partnership, a language, a love that went deeper than the initial spark. "I want to marry you," Gideon said one evening, as the sun set over the water in shades of gold and crimson. "Properly, not because society demands it, but because I choose you. Every day, in every way, I choose you. A nothing makes a difference, you. But Gideon, marriage will make things official, legal. Your father will know exactly where we are. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not ashamed. I want the world to know you're mine and I'm yours." They were married a week later in a small church near the harbor, with Bennett and his wife as witnesses. Ilara wore a simple blue dress she'd bought with her own earnings, the first new dress she'd owned in 7 years. Gideon slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, and when the priest pronounced them husband and wife, she felt something settle into place inside her. She was no longer an orphan, no longer a bastard, no longer nothing. She was Ilara Carter, partner and wife and equal. For a while, life was almost peaceful. They rented a small house near the docks, nothing grand but theirs. Ilara filled it with books and flowers, making a home from simple things. The business grew steadily. Gideon proved to have a natural talent for negotiation, while Ilara's careful bookkeeping kept their accounts precise and profitable. But shadows from the past are not so easily escaped. The letter arrived on a gray morning, sealed with the Thornwell crest. Ilara found it on their doorstep, her heart sinking as she recognized the mark. She brought it inside with trembling hands. Gideon opened it at the breakfast table, his face growing darker with each line he read. Finally, he set it down, his jaw tight. "What is it?" Ilara asked, though part of her already knew. "My father is dying." Gideon's voice was carefully controlled. "Cancer, the doctors say. He has perhaps 6 months. Rosalind has written to say he's asking for me. wants to make amends before the end. Ilara's first instinct was relief. Relief that Lord Thornwell's cruelty would soon end. But she saw the conflict in Gideon's eyes and understood it wasn't that simple. "Will you go?" she asked softly. "I don't know." He stood, moving to the window that looked out over the harbor. "Part of me wants to let him die alone, but another part," he paused, "he's still my father, despite everything." "Then go," Ilara said. "Go and say what needs to be said. Make your peace or make your war. But don't let it remain unfinished." He turned to look at her. "Come with me. Gideon, I'm the last person your family wants to see. You're my wife. Where I go, you go. We're in this together, remember?" So they returned to Thornwell Manor, traveling the same roads they'd fled months before. But everything was different now. They rode in their own modest carriage, paid for with their own money. They wore simple clothes, but they were chosen, not assigned. And they held hands openly, without shave or fear. The manor looked smaller somehow, less imposing, or perhaps they had simply grown larger. Rosalind met them in the drawing room, her face a complicated mask of emotions. She'd aged in the months since they'd left, new lines carved around her mouth and eyes. "He's upstairs," she said without preamble. "The doctors say he doesn't have long." "How is Mother?" Gideon asked. "How do you think?" "Her husband is dying." Rosalind's voice cracked. "We've lost everything. The debts Father kept hidden are being called in. Without the Ashworth alliance, we can't cover them. The manor will have to be sold." Ilara saw something flicker across Gideon's face. Not satisfaction, but a complicated sorrow. "I'm sorry," Gideon said, and meant it. "Are you?" Rosalind's eyes were hard. "You got what you wanted. Freedom, love, a new life. While we're left to pick up the pieces. That's not fair, Rosalind." "Fair?" She laughed bitterly. "I was as trapped as you were, Gideon. I just didn't have the courage to break free." The admission hung in the air between them. Ilara saw Rosalind properly for the first time, not as an antagonist, but as another victim of the same suffocating system. "It's not too late," Gideon said quietly. "Even now, it's not too late to choose differently. Isn't it?" Rosalind gestured around the room. "What life is there for me beyond this?" "You're not nothing," Ilara spoke. Rosalind's eyes snapped to her. "You're intelligent and capable. The life you've known is ending, yes, but that doesn't mean you're ending with it." Rosalind stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned away. "Father's asking for you. Room at the end of the hall." They climbed the familiar stairs past paintings Ilara had once dusted. But she walked them now as an equal, Gideon's hand warm in hers. Lord Thornwell's chamber was dim, the smell of sickness heavy. Lady Thornwell sat beside the bed. She looked up as they entered, something like relief flickering across her features. "You came," she said to Gideon. "Alagranus!" The man in the bed barely resembled the imposing lord who'd commanded Thornwell with an iron fist. Edward Thornwell had been consumed from the inside, reduced to bones and papery skin. But his eyes, when they opened, still held that fierce intelligence. "Gideon!" The name came out as barely a whisper. "And the girl. You brought the girl." "Her name is Ilara," Gideon said, "and she's my wife." Lord Thornwell made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "Wife. You actually did it. Threw everything away. I threw away a prison, and I gained a partner, a companion, a love I would never have found in the marriage you arranged." Gideon's voice was steady. "I came because you asked me to, Father, but I won't pretend to regret my choices. I'm happy, truly happy, for the first time in my life." Something passed across Lord Thornwell's face. Pain, perhaps, or regret. "I was wrong," he said finally, the words seeming to cost him everything. "About many things. The Ashworth alliance collapsed anyway. Everything I built is crumbling, and I realize now it was built on sand to begin with." Lady Thornwell's hand tightened on her husband's. Tears tracked silently down her cheeks. "I wanted to give you security," Lord Thornwell continued. "But in doing so, I imprisoned you, made you live my life instead of your own." His eyes found Alara. "And you? I was cruel to you, dismissed you as less than human because of circumstances beyond your control. I'm—" the words seemed to stick in his throat. "I'm sorry." Alara felt Gideon's hand squeeze hers. She looked at the dying man before her, the one who had commanded her humiliation, and she found to her surprise that she couldn't hate him anymore. He was just a man, flawed and afraid. "I forgive you," she said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, but because I do. I won't carry your hatred with me anymore." Lord Thornwell's eyes closed. A single tear escaped, tracking down his weathered cheek. "Thank you," he breathed. They stayed for 3 days. Alara stood beside Gideon in the family pew, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed. She was acknowledged now. After the service, as they prepared to return to Harwich, Rosalind approached them in the manor's entrance hall. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told Alara. "About choosing differently." She held out a letter. "Bennett and Sons. That's your company, isn't it?" "My husband's," Alara corrected, "though I help manage the books. Do you need more help?" "I'm good with figures, and I speak 4 languages fluently. That must be useful in trade negotiations." Gideon and Alara exchanged a glance. "You want to work?" Gideon asked carefully. "I want to be useful. I want to build something instead of just existing ornamentally in the ruins." Rosalind's chin lifted. "I won't pretend we'll be friends. I can't erase the cruelty I showed you, but I can try to be better, if you'll give me the chance." It was Alara who answered. "Everyone deserves a chance to begin again. Come to Harwich when you're ready. We'll find a place for you." The years that followed were not without struggle, but they were rich with meaning. The shipping business grew steadily under their combined efforts. Gideon's understanding of international markets, Alara's careful management, and Rosalind's linguistic skills created a formidable team. Thornwell Manor was sold to a merchant family. Lady Thornwell took a house in Bath, supported by a modest allowance. She wrote occasionally, stiff letters that gradually grew warmer. Alara discovered she had a talent for some investments failed, but many succeeded and their wealth grew. But more than wealth, they built community. Their household became a gathering place for artists, thinkers, and reformers. Alara found herself at the center of conversations about social reform, education for the poor, women's rights. Gideon watched her blossom with quiet pride. "You're magnificent," he told her one evening. "You've become exactly who you were meant to be." "We both have," she replied. Together, their happiness was not perfect. Alara miscarried twice before finally carrying a daughter to term, and those losses left scars. But through it all, they held fast to each other. Rosalind, who had carved out her own life, eventually marrying a ship's captain, became Clara's doting aunt. The animosity between the women had transformed into something resembling friendship. The cycle of pain and redemption seemed to stretch back through generations, but it could be broken. It was being broken, one choice at a time. Someday, as the years passed, Alara and Gideon became fixtures in Harwich society, not the rigid society of the manor, but something more fluid and vital. They were known for their generosity, their willingness to invest in worthy causes, their open home and open minds. Ilara never forgot where she came from. She funded schools for orphans and bastards, creating opportunities for children who had been told they were nothing. She hired women who needed a second chance. She used her position not to separate herself from those who still suffered, but to build ladders back to them. "You're changing the world," Gideon told her one evening as they walked along the harbor. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of amber and rose. "One person at a time, perhaps, but you're changing it." "We're changing it," she corrected. "This was never just me." "No," he agreed, pulling her close. "It's always been us." They stood there as the light faded. Two people who had chosen each other against all odds and built a life from that choice. Not a perfect life, but a real one. Not an easy life, but an honest one. Not the life they'd been told to want, but the life they'd fought to create. And in the growing darkness, with the sound of the sea and the cry of gulls and the laughter of their daughter drifting from the house behind them, Ilara felt something like peace. Years turned to decades, and the world kept changing. The rigid social hierarchies that had seemed immutable began to crack and shift. New laws were passed, new possibilities emerged. It was slow, frustratingly slow, but the arc of history bent towards something like justice. Ilara and Gideon grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces mapping the years in lines and softness. But their hands still fit together perfectly, fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. They still talked late into the night, still challenged each other's ideas, still found new things to learn and discover. Clara grew into a formidable woman in her own right, taking over the shipping business and expanding it into new territories. She married a scholar from India, scandalizing some and delighting her parents. The grandchildren came, 4 of them, each different and precious, and the house that had once been quiet with just the 2 of them filled with noise and life. On Ilara's 60th birthday, surrounded by family and friends, she looked around the table and felt overwhelmed by the impossibility of it all. That she was here, alive and loved and free. That the girl who had knelt in ashes had become a woman who built futures for others. Gideon caught her eye across the table and smiled, and in that smile she saw everything they'd been and everything they'd become. All the years, all the struggles, all the small and large victories. That night, alone in their room, he held her close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Never," she said, without hesitation. "Do you?" "Not even for a moment." He kissed her forehead. "You are the best choice I ever made." "We are the best choice we ever made," she corrected, as she always did. "You and me, together. That's what made everything possible." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. As the moon painted silver paths across the floor, and the sea whispered its eternal song just beyond the window, Ilara died first, quickly and peacefully, in her 72nd year. One moment she was reading in her favorite chair, the afternoon sun warm on her face, and the next she was simply gone. Gideon found her there, book still open in her lap, a slight smile on her lips as if she'd discovered something wonderful in those final seconds. He buried her on a hillside overlooking the harbor, where she could watch the ships come and go forever. The stone was simple, bearing only her name and a single line. "She chose herself and freed us all." Gideon lived 2 more years without her, continuing their work, loving their family, keeping her memory alive. But everyone could see he was waiting, patiently but certainly, for the moment when he could follow. When his time came, surrounded by children and grandchildren, his last words were her name. Just Ilara, whispered like a prayer and a promise, and then he was gone. They buried him beside her, and on his stone they carved, "He chose love and showed us the way." The shipping company continued under Clara's guidance, then her children's. The schools Ilara founded kept opening. The reforms she championed became law. The world she'd imagined slowly became real. And in the house by the harbor, their story lived on, told and retold. A testament to the radical power of choosing love over obligation, freedom over security, hope over fear. Two people who should never have been together, according to the rules of their time. Two people who refused to accept those rules and wrote their own instead. Two people who proved that courage and love could remake the world, one choice at a time. Their graves on the hillside became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking inspiration. Young lovers came to leave flowers. Dreamers came to remember that change was possible. The forgotten came to see proof that they mattered, that their lives had value, that they too could choose themselves. And on summer evenings, when the light turned golden and the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and roses, people swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand along the cliff path. Not ghosts exactly, but something more. An echo of love so strong it left an imprint on the world. The girl who was once nothing became everything. The Lord who surrendered everything found he had everything he needed. And together they built a legacy not of money or power, but of possibility. Of the revolutionary act of choosing love. Of the courage it takes to walk away from a life that's killing you toward one that might save you. Their story ended, as all stories must. But the choice they made to see each other fully, to honor each other completely, to build something together that neither could have built alone, that choice echoes still. Ilara and Gideon. Two names, two lives, one unbreakable bond. They were impossible. They were inevitable. They were proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reach for what you're told you can't have and refuse to let go. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. If this story found a mirror in your soul, leave your comment and share. Sometimes what pains us is what makes us most human.